in the Gulf. Fought in the name of religion, it sent hundreds of thousands to their deaths in human wave assaults. Total war that shocked the world with its use of chemical weapons. A conflict that threatened Western oil interests, dragging in the superpowers to protect them and prevent either side claiming victory. A war without material gain, yet one where Iraq could claim victory and pursue reward by seizing Kuwait, bringing the world to the edge of another conflict. For 50 years, Iraq's central worries had been the vulnerability of its oil fields and its need to cross other countries' land to pipe its oil because of its own narrow access to the Gulf. In an expansionist adventure, Iraq aimed to establish itself as a Gulf power by neutralizing its closest rival, Iran. Iraq invaded Iran in 7 areas. In the north to protect its own northern oil fields and to cut the strategic road to Tehran while protecting Baghdad. In the center to cut communications between northern and southern Iran. And in the south to grab the strategic towns in the Iranian oil fields. The Khuzestan landscape favored invaders using tanks and armored vehicles, making it easy to drive deeply into Iran. With a 5-to-1 superiority and facing only one depleted Iranian armored division, Iraqi forces moved quickly despite lacking air cover. Often using tanks as artillery, they softened up distant targets with heavy barrages as troops moved into more local objectives. The Iraqis' Soviet-made anti-tank gunships found few targets, scouting planes rapidly being pocketed by dugouts and entrenched artillery. The Iraqis had already proved these tactics against Kurdish rebels, but their strategy failed to recognize that defensive armies could also move quickly into position. Away from the Kurdish mountains, large armies could become clear targets for Iranian heavy artillery. Yet within 3 days, the Iraqis were laying siege to the strategic cities of Dezful, Akvaz and Khorramshahr. They had failed to realize that the tactics which proved successful against mountain guerrillas would have less impact against large towns and cities able to defy encirclement. But oil was already a major objective, and though determined to take over Iran's production capacity, Iraq was prepared first to smash it. The effect of the fighting was to close the Shatt al-Arab waterway to all shipping. It would be 8 years before any of these ships would be free to move again, making Iraq dependent on others, notably Kuwait, for transporting its oil. In the frontline cities, Iranian troops hurried to engage the invaders. Local resistance was led by Iran's Revolutionary Guards, who were fiercely loyal to Ayatollah Khomeini. They relied heavily on rifles and rocket-propelled grenades, and in sporadic engagements exacted a heavy toll of the invading forces. From their example stemmed the Iranian mood of self-sacrifice in a holy war. The Iraqis crossed the Karan River near Khorramshahr and advanced on the oil town of Abadan, a top Iraqi target. It was seen as the gateway to the Gulf, and Iraq deployed 60,000 troops and 1,000 tanks against its 10,000 defenders. But its preoccupation with taking Abadan distracted Iraq from easier military options. Generally speaking, Iraq's President Saddam Hussein overrated his troops' abilities. They were capable of quickly achieving one limited objective, but he set them too many, failing to choose between taking Khorramshahr, Abadan, Akvaz, or Dezful. By pursuing all at once, he lost time as well as the advantage of surprise. Only Khorramshahr fell, Meanwhile, his losses mounted and the devastation of border areas continued as the big guns homed in on the towns like Akvaz that were defying encirclement. Iranian phantoms hit back. Iraq had tried to copy the blitzkrieg tactics which won Israel the Six-Day War by smashing the Iranian Air Force on the ground, but either they missed or their bombs failed to explode. The Iranians carried out up to 150 sorties a day, mostly with planes kept airworthy by cannibalizing others. The Iraqis compounded their error with military planning so poor that they failed to provide adequate air defenses for their own vital oil facilities. Oil facilities on both sides burned as the Iraqi invasion ground to a halt and hostilities entered a phase of sporadic war. Khorram Shah in the wake of invasion. Its loss offended Iranian national honor and, dubbed City of Blood, it became a focus for the Iranian counterattack. Despite Iraq's initial advantages of surprise and manpower, its blitzkrieg had failed, and it had to reconcile itself to a protracted war for which it was unprepared. Iraq's forces were led personally by President Saddam Hussein, a strong-willed, intransigent man whose lack of military training made him a careless planner. He entered the war with no clear idea how to end it, consistently overestimated the abilities of his troops, and responded to setbacks by executing generals who retreated. For Iran, Hashemi Rafsanjani, Ayatollah Khomeini's most trusted lieutenant, was effectively the military leader for most of the war. Popular and charismatic, he had been sacked from the Shah's army for influencing troops towards the Islamic Revolution. He had a gift for simplifying complex tactics and became an ingenious and pragmatic commander. Inviting comparison with the First World War, Iraq made only minor territorial gains and, losing the initiative, built an artificial lake to protect Basra, its second city. Iran's obsession with capturing Basra would see them mounting repeated offensives through the marshes to the north, centered on the oil-rich Majnoon Islands. Despite ferocious bombardments, Iraq was now failing in its objectives, confirming it had exhausted its capacity to make further gains. With supply lines badly overstretched, partly the result of unclear war aims and strategy, the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein announced a voluntary withdrawal from all captured territory. In the event, and just as in Kuwait more recently, the withdrawal was not complete. Ironically, Saddam Hussein was sanctioning retreat, the very maneuver for which he had already executed 3 generals. Iraq's aim of undermining Iran's Islamic Revolution had more than failed. Instead, successful Iranian resistance, then expulsion of the invaders, had cemented it. Khomeini's volunteers headed for the front, their martyrdom symbolized by the red waters of the bizarre fountain of blood in Tehran. With Iran gripped by religious fervor since 1978, they were ready for a high battle toll. But they lacked military skills, and their habit of congregating indecisively presented the ideal targets that ensured a high casualty rate. They also had a message for Western governments supporting Iraq with armaments.
These people here, these people who come here to fight, they just, they've left their families. They've left their houses. Just they want to come here just to fight the Iraqis. But your country is now helping Iraq, right? But why? You see these people? How old is he? How old is this guy? Must be 14 or something. But he's come here to fight. He's left his mother, he's left his father.
Just like the First World War, volunteer battalions were raised from particular towns, school friends encouraged to join together like the British PALS regiments. Their slaughter on the borders of Iraq hit individual communities especially hard, but they turned the tide as Iran took the initiative. More innovative than the Iraqis, the Iranians used frogmen to spearhead a succession of offensives aimed at Basra. They headed waterborne attacks, penetrating the Awa al-Hawazeh marshes to try to cut the Basra-Baghdad highway. Supported by fast boats, their mobility surprised Iraqi strategists who regarded the marshes as a watertight natural defense barrier. With floating pontoons, these tactics were as innovative as those used by the North Vietnamese against the Americans a decade earlier. Iraqi strength in heavy weapons was now a disadvantage in battles that at their peak involved 500,000 soldiers with 1 in 20 killed in action. Iraqi forces entrench behind the deeply dug emplacements of the artificial Fish Lake east of Basra. Here, Iran's offensives were far more costly. On these flatlands dominated by heavily fortified Iraqi positions, Iranian human wave attacks without air cover provided ideal targets for Iraqi artillery. But often inflexible, the Iraqis were easily circumvented by Iranians moving south to another important success in this area, the capture of al-Rizaz Island and the Shatt al-Arab. Here was another battlefield presenting images of the First World War, the winter conditions recalling the Battle of the Somme in 1916. Deeply dug trenches broken by strong points and dugouts smouldering from recent fighting. Everywhere signs of the soldiers' natural enemy. Thick mud, dried now, but recently the clinging stuff that bogged down the fighting. And brand new stocks of rocket-propelled grenades. Iran, now under arms embargo, was already self-sufficient in such weapons production. The prospect of Basra being cut off eventually panicked Iraqi leaders into widespread use of chemical weapons. Iranian gas masks afforded little protection, and chemical weapons, more than any other Iraqi ordnance,